colonists and patriots. I'm George Washington. Yes, the George Washington. The George Washington who was the first president of the United States of America. If that doesn't ring a bell, you might also recognize me from the dollar bill. I was born on February 22nd, 1732 at Pope's Creek Plantation in Westmoreland County, Virginia. Eventually, as a major in Virginia's militia, I fought in the French and Indian War, supporting the British. After 5 years in the militia, I settled down and started a family. During that time, my teeth got worn out, so I had to get ivory dentures. I do not have wooden teeth, but I do look quite dashing. I met Martha Dandridge Custis at a dance and was love at first sight, and eventually we married. Now, let me tell you how the Revolutionary War began and the important Battle of Yorktown. The British had borrowed a lot of money to win the French and Indian War, so in order to repay this debt, the British government put a tax on printed materials, the Stamp Act. Many protested until the Stamp Act was repealed. That's when the British put a tax on tea. Everyone drinks tea, so everyone would have to pay this tax. Patriots like myself were very much against this. So, on April 19th, 1775, the Boston Massacre took place. British loyalists fired at colonists who were protesting the taxes of King George III, and the Revolutionary War began. It was 1781 when I learned that thousands of British soldiers were camped in Yorktown, in present-day Virginia. It was the perfect opportunity for a surprise attack on the British, but I was too far away and I did not have enough soldiers. Fortunately, one of my men came to inform me that Marquis de Lafayette and French soldiers were coming to Yorktown to help us. Huzzah! I quickly led my men to Yorktown, and when we arrived, we had to fight a hard battle for 3 whole weeks. Then, on October 19th, 1781, the British surrendered in Yorktown. After 2 more years of fighting, we signed a peace treaty with the British. Finally, the Revolutionary War was over and we had won. I, George Washington, am proud to have helped this nation grow to become the country it is today. Long live American independence!
Good morning, fellow patriots. I'm no ordinary 16-year-old. Let me introduce myself. My name is Sybil Ludington. Here's my story. Born in 1761, I was the oldest of 12, yes, 12 brothers and sisters. As a child, I spent most of my time helping my mother, and when I finished my chores, I would ride my horse Star. I trained Star from the time she was born. Everything in my life was quiet and peaceful until one cold, rainy night in April 1777. My father, Colonel Henry Ludington, a patriot in the American Revolution, was telling a bedtime story to my younger siblings. We were all getting ready to sleep when suddenly there was a knock at the door. It was a courier. He told us that 2,000 British soldiers are burning down houses in Danbury. General George Washington was 2 days away on horseback, and my father's men were spread out across 40 miles of countryside. The courier was too tired. Who would deliver the message to the warning to the rest of the patriots? I'll go, I said. I knew this would not be easy, but I wanted to help save Danbury from getting burned down. It's far too dangerous, my mother said. I could ride as anyone else, I said. I put Star's favorite riding saddle on. My mother got me a warm woolen cloak and wrapped it around my shoulders. I picked up a long stick that I would use to wake up any sleeping families and to fight off outlaws I might encounter. I mounted Star and off we raced. I arrived at the first house on my route. I slowed down Star, picked up my stick, and hit it on the door as hard as I could to wake up the sleeping family. The British are burning down Danbury, I shouted. Meet at Colonel Ludington's house. And then I rode off to alert the next family. Eventually, I lost count of how many families I woken up. It is widely reported that I covered up to 40 miles on horseback. It was very hard to stay brave, especially as a 16-year-old girl who was all alone on a dangerous journey. Because of my actions, word spread fast, and we were able to help save Danbury from getting burned down. I finally returned home. It was the dawn of a new day. 400 soldiers were in front of my house, ready to follow my father's orders, all thanks to my courage. General Washington even thanked me personally for what I had done. If it hadn't been for me and Star, the American Revolution might have ended very differently. After the war, a statue of me was placed in Carmel, New York. Well, I'm off to go feed Star now. Goodbye, and long live American independence.
Oh, how do you do, fellow patriots? I was just in the middle of writing a new poem. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Phyllis Wheatley. I was one of the best-known poets during the pre-19th century. I was born in 1753 in West Africa. At around the age of 8, I was kidnapped and brought to America aboard a ship and then sold into slavery to the Wheatley family. As I got older, Mrs. Wheatley taught me English, Greek, Latin, geography, and math, and I learned how to read and write. I was only 13 when my first book of poetry was published. Here's an excerpt from my first published poem, Whitefield Elegy. Since this fair sun withdraws his golden rays, no more to brighten these distressful days, his lonely tabernacle sees no more a Whitefield landing on the British shore. Later on, I even wrote a poem to General George Washington. And because of my poem, I even had a chance to meet him. Let me tell you the story. At the time, General Washington was in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I had just written a letter to him and included my new poem titled, To His Excellency, General Washington. Why don't I read you another excerpt from that poem? Proceed, great chief, with virtue on thy side. Thy every action let the goddess guide. A crown, a mansion, and a throne that shine. With gold unfading, Washington, be thine. General Washington even replied to me on February 28, 1776. He addressed me as Miss Phyllis, and it might have been the first time in his life that General Washington had addressed a black woman as Miss, so it was kind of a big deal. Word traveled fast about my writing, and people wanted to hear my poetry, even King George. I traveled to England, but before I had the chance to read my poetry to King George, I had to return to Boston to be by Mrs. Wheatley's side in her final days, as she was very ill. By 1783, the American Revolution had come to an end. During my time in the American Revolution, I used my voice and talents as a poet. I served as a role model to all people who wanted equal rights and showed the importance of an education for all. I wrote my final poem in 1784 and died that same year. Wait a minute. If I died, how am I here? Still, I have some poems to finish. Please excuse me while I return to my writing. Farewell for now, and long live American independence.
Greetings, fellow patriots. My name is Molly Pitcher, and I helped win the Revolutionary War. My real name, though, is Mary Lugwood Hayes. But the reason why everyone calls me Molly Pitcher is because I used a pitcher to help the American soldiers in the war. Here's how it happened. During the fall of 1777, the Continental Army lost battles at Brandywine Creek and Germantown, Pennsylvania. The British Army took over Philadelphia, and General George Washington ordered the American troops to retreat. We were losing badly. It was June 28, 1778, and my husband William Hayes was fighting in the Battle of Monmouth. It took place on an extremely hot summer day. There were also cannons firing everywhere, which made it even hotter. Our soldiers were suffering. So I decided to grab a pitcher and run to the spring to fill it up with water. I ran back and forth so many times I thought I developed blisters on my feet. I was terrified running around the battlefield dodging bullets. Suddenly I saw my husband William collapse. I wasn't sure if it was because of the heat from being winded. I helped him up, but he fell again. I'd hoped he'd be okay, but this time I realized he was very unwell. William could no longer shoot the cannons. I didn't know if we'd be able to win the battle without our cannons. It was then that I made one of the bravest decisions of my life, having seen William do it hundreds of times before. I knew exactly what to do. First, I put the gunpowder in the cannon, then loaded the cannonball and fired. Boom! I kept reloading the cannon and firing. Boom! Another cannon exploded, but this time it wasn't from me. It was fired at me. I thought I had been hit, but luckily it only ripped my dress. I felt scared, relieved, and thankful the cannonball had not injured me. In the end, the Americans won the war, and I, Mary Liquid Hayes, had contributed my part to the victory. For my heroic role, General George Washington made me a non-commissioned officer. After that, I was widely known as Sergeant Molly. I became the symbol of courage in the face of difficulty. Now I must return to Pennsylvania to inspire other patriots. Farewell, and long live American independence.
Sir, yes, sir. Well, that's what I would say if I was still a soldier in the Revolutionary War. Who am I? For now you can call me the secret soldier. I had a sad childhood. My mother was ill and I had to be sent to live with her cousin, but her cousin died soon after. Then I went to stay with my grandmother. I had many responsibilities while I lived there and life was difficult. After that, I was sent to a family named the Thomases to work as a servant for 10 years. After 10 years, I moved into a small house next to a school. I taught at the school for the whole summer. But the war was beginning, and I wanted to do something to help. So I joined the war under a false name, Robert Shirtliff. I committed to 3 whole years of service in the Revolutionary War. We went on many week-long marches that were tiring and hard. We also had to fight the Tories, or people who supported the British. One day, I was riding my horse searching for food for fellow soldiers, when suddenly I found myself on the ground. I looked down and saw that I was covered in blood. The Tories had shot me in the leg and neck. A fellow soldier rushed me to the hospital, but I took the bullet out of my own leg by myself. It was painful, but I had to operate on my wound all on my own. You might be wondering why I did that. Well, I'm the secret soldier. After all, I had to protect my secret. Later on, our troops went to Philadelphia. There was a raging fever spreading. I caught it and fainted. I was taken to the hospital, and the doctors and nurses thought I had died. But I used all the strength I had left to tell them I was still alive. Dr. Bonney examined me and found out my secret. He soon after mailed a letter to General Patterson to let him know I wasn't who they thought I was. I met up with the general and told him to get the finest gown he could, so I can show him what I, Deborah Sampson, really looked like. What was my secret? I was in fact a woman soldier, and my real name was Deborah Sampson. Yes, I was a woman soldier. Pretending to be a male soldier was difficult, but I would do anything to keep my country safe. After the general learned that I was a woman, he had no choice but to let me leave the war. Later on, I delivered speeches about my story in many different places. I do not regret my decision to fight as a secret woman soldier. I must leave now. I'm expected to give a big speech in Boston. Long live freedom.
Good day to you, fellow patriots. I was just finishing up some work in my cell, but I can return to that later. My name is James Fortin, and I'm here to tell you about when I was captured as a British prisoner. Here's some information about me. I was born on September 17th, 1766, in Philadelphia. My father had a sail-making shop where I helped him as a young boy. That's how I learned to make sails. When I was 7 years old, my father passed away. My family needed money desperately, so I took a job at a shop to help. During that time, the British ruled the colonies, but the colonists wanted freedom. I was only 15 years old, but I wanted to help the Patriots win the war to gain my freedom. In the year 1781, I was aboard a ship called the Royal Lewis, a warship for the Patriots. A British ship called the Amphion trapped us. We survived because we were badly outnumbered. On October 9th, 1781, at 15 years of age, I boarded the Amphion as a British prisoner. I had to work on the ship and sleep on the hard, running ground. I was also scared because I feared that I might be forced by the British to do hard work on plantations. Later, in 1782, I was sent into another prison ship called the Jersey. I thought about my great-grandfather. He had also been taken from his home in Africa and sent to America on a crowded, dirty ship full of prisoners. In my free time, when I wasn't working on the deck of the Jersey, I dedicated my time to help sick prisoners who were suffering. One day, in April 1782, a soldier saw yelling my name. "James Thornton, where is James Thornton?" When I saw him, he told me I'd be leaving the ship that very evening. I felt surprised, overjoyed, and suspicious, all at once. I couldn't believe I was going home. For a minute, I even thought I was dreaming. Did he really say that I was now free? I practically fainted hearing the news. That evening, I got off the ship in New York City. I was so desperate to return home, but I didn't have much money, so I walked barefoot all the way home to Philadelphia. I felt the cold stone, dirt, and sand pressing against my feet. It was very painful, but I kept thinking that soon I'd be home. Suddenly, I saw a small house. That was it! There was my house! I went as fast as I could. I knocked on the door, and my mother answered. She said, "James, is that where you?" "Yes," I said as I hugged her. Finally, I was home. I spent the rest of my life as a sailmaker at my father's shop, since I was an expert in everything having to do with ships. By the time I was 32, I was one of the wealthiest men in Philadelphia. I also helped in the anti-slavery movement and founded the famous abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator. Now, do you please excuse me as I go and finish making my sail. Long live freedom!
Hello there. You might recognize me as one of the greatest writers on earth. Yes, that's right. It's me, Thomas Jefferson. As a child, I loved to read and to study, and I believe that's one of the reasons why I became so successful in life. At the age of 9, I was sent to a boarding school and learned how to speak Greek, Latin, and French. I attended the College of William and Mary for 7 years. By the time Congress appointed me to write the Declaration of Independence, the Revolution had already begun. The Declaration's purpose was to explain the colonists' rights and reasons for the Revolution. Congress had to justify our cause, and we did it through writing the Declaration. I spent 2 weeks in Philadelphia drafting what ended up being such an important part of the American Revolution. While drafting and pouring out my heartfelt ideas about liberty and justice, I often got up to play my violin or drink tea. I composed some of the most important and famous words ever written. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Am I not an amazing writer? The people I worked with on the Declaration, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Robert R. Livingston, and Roger Sherman, made a few changes to my work. Can you believe that even a great writer like myself needed edits? I could hardly. Finally, on July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was published. But here's an interesting fact. Did you know the Declaration was not signed by all 56 congressional delegates by July 4th? In actuality, it was signed about a month later on August 6th, 1776. But today we celebrate July 4th, not August 6th. Unfortunately, King George refused to read the Declaration of Independence, so the war continued by his command. 7 years later, in 1783, we won the Revolutionary War. Huzzah! A few years later, President George Washington asked me, yes, me, to be his Secretary of State. In 1796, I ran for president against John Adams and lost. I did, however, become his vice president. Eventually, I became the third president of the United States. Before I go, here's something else for you to remember me by. Every time you eat ice cream and think about how incredibly delicious it is, you should think of me, because I was the first to have a recorded recipe for ice cream. Without me, perhaps America wouldn't be the delicious democracy it is today. Long live American independence.
Hello, I am Joseph Brandt, but my tribe knows me as Chief Thay Indonesia. If you're wondering what my Mohawk name means, it translates to he who places two bets, or two sticks that are bound together for strength. The Mohawk people are part of the Haudenosaunee culture. The English called us the Iroquois. I was born in present-day Ohio in 1742 on the banks of the Muskingum River. My parents were Christians and their names were Peter and Margaret Tion Wakwan Girkoa. My father died when I was young. I participated in my first battle in 1758 at Lake George. In 1761, I was sent to Moore's Charity School in Lebanon, Connecticut, where I learned to read and write in English. I also studied the Bible. In 1763, I left school to work as an interpreter for a Christian missionary. A year later, I left the missionary and made plans to go to college in New York City. However, my plans were interrupted. Fighting broke out between some Native American groups and white settlers. Pontiac's Rebellion. This caused anger towards Native Americans, and I wouldn't be safe at school. Suddenly, my life began to take an exciting and dangerous turn. When I was younger, I often traveled with Sir William Johnson. He was the superintendent of Indian Affairs and often worked with Haudenosaunee leaders on matters between Native people and settlers. Later on, while Sir William and I were in Britain, colonists were pushing for independence from the British Crown. In the summer of 1776, Congress voted to declare independence from Britain. I had to pick a side to fight for. Would I side with the British or the colonists? Eventually, I chose to support the British. If I supported the colonists, I would not be able to protect our lands. So I chose to help the British because they promised we would have the opportunity to remain on our lands. I proved a very good military commander. I skillfully led a group of Native Americans in the Battle of Oriskany on August 6, 1777. The colonists fought back by burning Haudenosaunee villages. 385 soldiers were killed and another 80 were wounded or captured. I led a raid on a well-protected village called Cherry Valley on November 11, 1778. After the attacks, I gained a reputation as a feared military leader. Unfortunately, the British lost the American Revolutionary War. Despite everything, the Mohawks found land and lived in relative freedom. I married an Oneida woman named Margaret and had 2 children, Isaac and Christiana. I am now remembered for my alliance with the British during the American Revolutionary War and for my great military skills. Thanks to my powerful leadership, Britain gained an early advantage in the Revolutionary War. My story is important to American and Mohawk history.
Perfect union, Greetings, Patriots. I was just feeding my horses some hay. I'm James Lafayette, but my full name is James Armstead Lafayette. I worked for a Virginia tobacco farmer named William Armstead, who sold military supplies to the Patriots. I was also born an enslaved person. One day, I heard that if you fought for the colonies, you would be granted your freedom. I hoped I'd be able to gain my freedom through helping the Patriots. William Armstead agreed to let me join the Revolutionary War for the Patriots. In 1781, General Marquis de Lafayette gave me a mission. I was to dress as a runaway enslaved person and present myself to General Cornwallis and Benedict Arnold, who were fighting for the British cause. My mission was to say My mission was to make the British believe I was spying on the Americans. Of course, I was only pretending, but they accepted my help anyway. As a spy, I gave secret British plans and information to General Lafayette. Some of this information included when the British were planning to attack the Patriots. Additionally, I gave false information to Cornwallis and Benedict Arnold to frustrate the British. If I was captured as a spy, my life could end immediately. On October 19th, 1781, the Battle of Yorktown finally ended, and the Americans had won the war. After all my work, I was not granted my freedom because the Patriots said I was more of a spy than a soldier. I was sad and disappointed because I had risked my life to get information to help them win the war. General Lafayette was furious, so he wrote a certificate declaring that I should have my freedom in 1784. The letter from Lafayette read, "This is to certify that the bearer by the name of James has done essential services to me while I had the honor to command in this state. His intelligences from the enemy's camp were industriously collected and faithfully delivered. He perfectly acquitted himself with some important commissions I gave him, and appears to me to entitled to every award his situation could admit of." 2 years later, the Virginia legislature finally declared that I could have my freedom. I was so grateful that I changed my name to James Lafayette after General Lafayette. After the Revolutionary War, I got married, started a family, and bought 40 acres of farmland. Pardon me, I must now tend to my favorite crops. Long live American freedom.
Good morning, fellow Patriots. My name is Mercy Otis. I was born in September 1728. When I was younger, my parents expected me to get married and keep a house like my mother. But I had big dreams and wanted more. My father helped make laws for the colony when he worked in the Massachusetts government. I found that thrilling because I loved reading and writing very much. A few years later, my oldest brother, Jimmy, went to Harvard. Women were not allowed to go to college at the time, but I developed my mind through reading and education anyway. When Jimmy finished college, I traveled to Harvard for his graduation. There I met James Warren, my brother's best friend. I married James and we had 5 children. Then bam! A catastrophe! My brother Jimmy was savagely beaten by our loyalist enemies. I cried. His body healed but not his mind. He was then declared insane. Then another catastrophe. British troops marched into Boston. 5 Americans lay dead. There were riots. Shots were fired. Patriots refused to buy British goods. Suddenly, an idea. I could carry on Jemmy's work. When my children were asleep, I would write poems and books. I did not sign my own name to my writing because people would not respect a woman writer, nor consider my ideas seriously during this time. I wrote The Squabble of the Sea Nymphs, about the Boston Tea Party, a night where patriots dumped tea into Boston Harbor rather than pay a British tax. John Adams said that my writing was genius. Then suddenly there was all-out war between the patriots and the loyalists. Women were not allowed to go to war, so I remained in Plymouth to work as a secretary for my husband James at Army headquarters. I complained to Abigail Adams that men could attend the great school of the world, while we women were confined to the narrow circle of domestic cares. I came up with my most ambitious plan yet, to write about the Revolutionary War. Why not? I share my father's love of democracy, Jemmy's passion for freedom, and James's sense of duty. Finally, in 1805, at the age of 77, I proudly signed my name to the 3 volumes of books. More than 1,000 pages. On the cover, History of the rise, progress, and termination of the Revolution, interspersed with biographical, political, and moral observations. By Mrs. Mercy Otis Warren. I did not need to hide the fact that I was a woman and a great writer from anyone anymore. I felt good that everyone knew my true identity and that I could be credited for my original work. In December 1814, at the age of 86, I passed away. My writing and words live on. Long live American independence.
Are those people? Here, let me put these on. There we go, much better. Those are people. Good morning, fellow patriots. I'm Benjamin Franklin. I'm using my invention called bifocals, a type of eyeglasses with two lenses that helps me to read and see farther. I invented bifocals in 1783 in Paris. Speaking of Paris, let me tell you about the signing of the Treaty of Paris. In May of 1775, I and other patriots from each of the 13 colonies gathered in Philadelphia to decide what to do about the Revolutionary War. This group was known as the Continental Congress. A year later, we approved the Declaration of Independence. The Continental Congress then sent me to France in October 1776 to seek support because the Americans were losing the war and needed help. 70 years old and living in France, I found many admirers. I stood out in my simple fur cap, spectacles, and plain clothing among the richly dressed French who welcomed me. I told everyone who would listen about the American fight for freedom. French generals agreed to help train American troops, and French citizens donated money. In 1778, we signed the Treaty of Alliance with France. I was happy that I was successful in finding allies to support our cause. With the help of the French, we won the Revolutionary War at last in 1783. In that same year, I helped her a peace treaty with Britain called the Treaty of Paris, which officially ended the war. I left France in 1785 after my friend, Thomas Jefferson, came to replace me. Apparently, retiring was not on my mind because in 1787, at the age of 81, I signed the United States Constitution. You can probably tell from looking at me that I was the Constitution's oldest signer. Did you know that I'm the only founding father to have signed all 4 documents that established the United States of America? I signed the Declaration of Independence, the Treaty of Alliance, the Treaty of Paris, and the U.S. Constitution. Not bad, eh? Thank you for listening to me speak about my role as a diplomat and writer during the Revolutionary War. If you ever miss seeing me, you can find me on a $100 bill. Even at my old age, I still look great. Speaking of aging, remember, like I always say, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Now, you'll have to excuse me. I must go and prove that lightning is a form of electricity. Wish me luck.
Greetings, fellow patriots. My name is Anna Strong. I was a member of the culprits firing during the Revolutionary War, and I helped deliver important news and military secrets to General George Washington. I was key in helping America win the war. Here's how I was recruited to become an American spy. One afternoon, someone came knocking on my door. I thought it was the British soldiers, so I grabbed my musket and braced for the worst. But it turns out it was my friendly neighbor, Abraham. He asked me to be a spy for the Patriots. I was surprised yet proud he has chosen me. If I was a spy, I could do my part to help the Americans win the war. One reason why he has chosen me to be a spy was because I had a house on the mountain looking over the sea, so I'd be able to spot British ships when they arrived. We created hidden signals by hanging up petticoats and handkerchiefs. These silent visual codes would inform other patriots what the British were doing or if they were coming. One fine afternoon, I was hanging up my black petticoats and 2 handkerchiefs when I heard hoofbeats coming up the road. I thought it was my husband Sella returning from Rhode Island, but I was wrong. It was the British officer. We greeted each other, then he suddenly said, "That's an unusual pattern of clothes you're hanging up, Miss Strong. Hope you don't find out you're a spy." He laughed, then turned to leave. He might have been joking, but still, I was worried. I did not want to be captured. Soon after, British soldiers came to live in my house because King George needed housing for his troops. Not only did the British take over my house, but they also liked to throw parties. At one of these parties, I overheard some people talking about how an American general named Benedict Arnold had switched loyalties to join the British because they were winning. I was shocked and informed Abraham as to what I had heard so he could get this news to General Washington. After a year, the soldiers were finally out of my house. We had won the war! I was so proud of myself for helping the Americans and General Washington win the war as a member of an important spy ring. Long live American independence!
Liberty once lost is lost forever. I once wrote a letter to my wife Abigail. Greetings, fellow patriots. I'm John Adams. I'm just about to board a boat to France to seek an alliance with the French. But before I tell you the story of how I helped America gain its independence, allow me to introduce myself. I was born on October 30th, 1735. I graduated from Harvard College, became a teacher, and then a lawyer. Here are some of my other accomplishments. I was the first Vice President of the United States. I was its second President. I was the first President to live in the White House. And lastly, I was one of the writers of the Declaration of Independence, signed in the summer of 1776. As you can see, I achieved many things. Now I would like to tell you the story of how I helped America gain its independence. Imagine the scene. Congress had finally agreed to vote on whether or not to break with England forever. If Congress voted in favor of independence, they need to explain to the world what America's freedoms were. That's when my colleagues and I decided to write the Declaration. Of Independence. At first, I was chosen to write it. However, I believe my good friend Thomas Jefferson was more suited to the role, so I persuaded him to write it. I told him, "You could write 10 times better than me," and he did it. I made a few edits to his work, and when he finished, it became a powerful statement of America's rights. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Thomas did a pretty good job, wouldn't you say? On the day Congress was to vote on the Declaration, I suddenly felt moved to give an unplanned speech. I poured out my love for this country. I felt brave, but also very nervous. My mouth and throat went dry, and all I could think about was what I was going to say next. My hope was that I would inspire everyone to vote for the Declaration of Independence. My speech lasted for 2 whole hours. When I finished, my friend Thomas Jefferson said, "John, your speech moved us from our seats." Then on July 2nd, 1776, Congress voted to make the colonies free and independent states. 2 days later, on July 4th, they voted to accept the Declaration of Independence. Yes, I was so happy I could have cried. The United States of America was born. The ties from Britain were cut forever. Unfortunately, King George didn't care about our Declaration of Independence. In his eyes, these are still his colonies, so the Revolutionary War continued. Now I must go seek alliances with the French to help us win this war. Long live American independence.
Bonjour, patriots! I'm Gilbert, but most people know me by the name Marquis de Lafayette. I was born on September 6, 1757, in Chavanic, France. My father passed away when I was only 3 years of age. Soon after, my mother and grandfather also passed away, leaving me a wealthy orphan with the title Marquis de Lafayette. In 1776, I, like many other Frenchmen, wanted to fight for American independence in the Continental Army. King Louis XVI, however, was not allowing Frenchmen to go to America. He didn't want to involve France in a conflict with Britain. I didn't bother to ask him, nor my family. I just left for America on my own and traveled to Philadelphia to join the fight.
In the fall of 1777, I had my first real experience of war. I fought alongside General Washington's troops in the Battle of Brandywine. During the battle, I felt a sharp pain in my knee, and suddenly everything went black. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital. I was in horrific pain and couldn't walk. My leg had been wounded, but I was determined to keep fighting. Another major event of the American Revolutionary War in which I played a key role was the Battle of Yorktown. The battle took place in 1781 in South Virginia and helped decide the outcome of the war. The fight was long and hard. Our soldiers were exhausted. Somehow, I had to come up with a plan to win it. British General Charles Cornwallis apparently thought the British ships would be good reinforcements for the next battle, so he sent his soldiers to the Yorktown Peninsula. I then knew we had to do. Here was my plan. We took all of our ships and made a triangle around all the ports, surrounding them for days. We cut them off from their supplies with no way to escape. Finally, the British surrendered on October 19th, 1781. America had won! After all we had done, George Washington and I became close friends. When I moved back to France, George and I wrote letters to each other almost every day, talking about our lives. George learned that during the war, most of our allies wanted to remove him from his position as general, but I, Marquis de Lafayette, told them not to do so, saving him and possibly the war. After the war ended, we were so happy that there was peace at last. My pal Thomas Jefferson accepted my help in writing the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which is inspired by the Declaration of Independence. After my performance in the battles of Brandywine and Yorktown, I was rewarded with the title the Hero of Two Worlds, France and America. Today, many streets and towns are named after me, so look for me next time you're out in the city. I want to tell you so much more, but I must say farewell now, my friends. Vive l'Amérique!
Greetings, fellow patriots. I'm Elizabeth Lumbet Freeman. I was a freedom fighter during and after the Revolutionary War, and an enslaved woman. Colonel John Ashley of Sheffield, Massachusetts, owned the land where I lived and worked. He was the richest man in Berkshire County, Massachusetts. His wife, Miss Ashley, was very mean and cruel to me. As a family member, my daughter Lizzie also had to work for the Ashleys. One day in 1773, I overheard Colonel Ashley speaking about human rights. Later, the town held a meeting to talk about the Massachusetts Constitution, and I heard these words: mankind in a state of nature are equal, free, and independent of each other, and have the right to the undisturbed enjoyment of their lives, their liberty, and property. Surely this must apply to me as well, even as an enslaved woman. I spoke to a young lawyer, Mr. Theodore Sedgwick, and I told him I had a right to be free. I told him the new Constitution stated that all people are born free and equal. Mr. Sedgwick helped me take my case to court in the town of Great Barrington. The case Brum and Bet v. Ashley was argued before a court, and we won. My daughter and I were the first enslaved African Americans to be freed under the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780. Ultimately, my case led to the abolition of slavery in the entire state. Later, I worked as a prominent healer, midwife, and nurse. I died in 1829, a free woman, surrounded by my children and grandchildren, in the free state of Massachusetts that I helped to create. One of my great-grandchildren was W.E.B. Du Bois, born in the very town where my historic case was argued. It was because of my courage and determination that the institution of slavery was finally abolished in Massachusetts. In my honor, people celebrate Elizabeth Freeman Day in Massachusetts every year on August 21st, the day my freedom was won.
This is a message to the so-called leader of you pesky rebels.
General George Washington. Admit it, Georgie. I'm the better leader. That's why everyone calls me king. You're merely a general. Oh, what's this? My word. Some peasants. I didn't see you there. You already know me, but let me remind you so you know how to behave properly. I'm King George III, and I was born in 1738 and will die in 1820. How absolutely morbid. Mummy's name was Augusta, and Papa's name was Frederick. Speaking of Papa, he died when I was 12, so we didn't make a lot of memories together, unfortunately. But Mummy made sure my life revolved around school, for it was Papa's wish that I become a better ruler than his father, so it was always study, study, study. My education ranged from music to agriculture to art and to science. At 22, I was crowned King of Great Britain. But little did I know what troubles the colonists would bring, which brings me to the implementation of unfair taxes. First, there was the Sugar Act. It required those ungrateful Americans to pay for the molasses they shipped from the Caribbean. The French and Indian War did drain most of our money, so I thought the colonists should help pay off this debt. I was ruling and protecting them, after all. Then there was the tea tax. I made them pay extra for the tea they bought. Apparently, this was a very big deal for the colonists. I had no idea why. I could have easily taxed the colonists even more. But thanks to my generous nature, I didn't. Rather than being grateful for all the things I've done, they rebelled against me, like naughty little fourth graders. It felt like a great betrayal against me, your faithful leader and great king. Worse, in 1776, aboard the Dartmouth, a group of rebels disguised as Mohawk Indians threw over 300 crates of tea in the Boston harbor. Yes, you heard me right. They threw my tea in the harbor. Can you imagine perfectly good tea being wasted in such an uncivilized way? Can you think of all the tea time we could have enjoyed together? When I received the news, I was infuriated. Just thinking about it makes me go absolutely crazy. The next thing I knew, I had lost the war. I felt defeated, unworthy, small. Wait, what did you say, my dear wife Charlotte? No, you did not spill tea again. At least this time it's not in the harbor. Have you gone mad as well, my dear? Well, until next time, you naughty Americans.